Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the MMA Pick'ems podcast, where I'll be breaking down UFC Fight Night, Gane versus Volkov, but more like fight afternoon, because this card is happening much earlier than usual. It's kicking off at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Not quite sure why they're doing that, as it's still happening in Las Vegas, but it is starting earlier this week. And this is another card where it's a little bit weak on paper. There are some solid matchups, should be a few fun fights. The main event, obviously, I think is carrying the card here. But if last week's any indication on what could potentially happen is just because a card is a bit weaker on paper, doesn't necessarily mean that it'll be bad. But let's hope this card delivers, and hopefully, like last week, it'll be a nice, fun card. And hopefully we could cash on a few bets. But speaking of, this card is honestly a little bit risky. There's quite a few unproven fighters here, a few unreliable fighters. So yeah, be careful with this card. Maybe don't go too heavy on it, because we do have a ton of good spots on the UFC 264 card coming up in a couple weeks. So maybe go a little light on this and then save your money for the upcoming card. But before we get any further, we do have to break down the previous event, which was pretty bad for me, honestly. As far as picks go, I only got 3 out of 12 right. Yeah, that's pretty pathetic. And honestly, kind of happy that betting-wise, I only dropped 0.58 units, considering I kind of missed on most of the picks there. And honestly, I'm not even too upset, because we did have a few bad beats as well. But, diving right into it, kicking off the night, we did drop the Joaquim Silva fight. Not too much to say there. I mean, the guy got caught, and the fight obviously didn't play out the way I expected it to. I don't think too many people expected this result. I mean, Silva I think he just threw like the laziest feint and a super telegraphed overhand, and Rick Glenn read that perfectly, lined it up clean, and put him out. And I was clowning on the knockout power of Glenn. I did say he didn't have a lot of power last week, but and I guess moving up a division helped a bit, but also Silva left his chin on a platter there. So Glenn gets his first knockout win in, I think, about 5 years. So, good for him for coming back, getting that highlight reel KO there. But moving along, we did also drop a unit on Davy Grant, Marlon Vera. I just felt the line was wide there, and that was a fight where I don't think it was too bad of a bet. Davy Grant kept it pretty close. I think he won the first round. The 30-26 score was pretty egregious in my opinion. I definitely think that Grant won the first round. I think he potentially could have won the second round too if, he just kind of laid and prayed a little more. But I think he was kind of overextending a little bit, but hey, it is what it is. Vera, very tough, very durable. He's a dog, man. And, I was kind of shitting on Vera a little bit there, but the guy's got a lot of grit, so good on him for gutting it out in that win. Also ended up dropping a unit on Dan Ige, Korean Zombie. That was kind of rough, because it definitely showed that there are levels to this where Korean Zombie was able to just pretty much beat Ige everywhere, on the feet, on the ground. This was a fight where I kind of thought Korean Zombie, if he did regress a little bit, Ige could keep it close, and Ige definitely is a dog out there, so I figured Ige would fight for your money, but that was just an absolute levels fight. Korean Zombie showing he still got a little bit left in the tank. And then for the props, man, this is where it gets a little weird. So I did drop Joaquim Silva inside the distance, so obviously he didn't get the win there, but I did think that Silva might have been able to knock Glenn out, but obviously he got finished pretty early, so that didn't cash. And then Virna Jandiroba by submission. So this was one where I said before that Murata, while she does like to grapple, she has had quite a few moments in her previous fights where she gave up the armbar or gave up armbar attempts, and it happened again in this fight, but she showed a lot of toughness, decided not to tap, and 2 weeks in a row we have two fighters deciding not to tap and ended up getting their arms broken or dislocated, and instead of losing by submission, they ended up losing by TKO. So a bit of a bad beat there. Really sucks for anyone who took Paul Craig by submission and Jandiroba by submission these weeks. Kind of rough there, but it is what it is with it when it comes to betting. And moving along, we also took Parisian Roque Martinez to go the distance, and I also did take a small stab on Martinez by decision. I just figured this was a very low-level heavyweight fight. Both guys did show some power on the regional scene, but both guys have shown to be pretty durable, so this was a fight where I expected it to be a bit of a heavyweight slop fest, And originally I'd wanted to take the over 1.5, but it had gotten pretty juiced. And at that point, I figured if it got past a round and a half, I don't think that either guy would be or would have the cardio to knock the other guy out. So I just took it to go the distance. And if it went the distance, I figured it'd be a pretty close fight. And I did say that I was leaning towards Martinez. And this was a fight where I definitely feel the decision was kind of bullshit. And, I hate to scream robbery, especially since I did take a shot on Martinez here, but I feel the general consensus is that Martinez did win. I had him winning the first and the third. The second one was a bit close, but I didn't really agree with the decision there. I felt that Parisian, while he did have some control time against the cage, I felt that Martinez was landing way more strikes. So, kind of rough there, and that would have potentially... if they got that correct, that would have swung me to the green for that night. But, sometimes it happens to bounce your way, sometimes it doesn't. So I'm not too upset about that. And then lastly, I did take Sung Choi over Julian Rosa. That really saved the night there. I just kind of faded the chin of Rosa, and Choi just looked super sharp in there. The guy had really quick hands, very good accuracy. I mean, the guy came out with the fury, man, and he looked good from the beginning, and he looked very sharp. And he was able to find the chin of Rosa early there, got him out of there in the first round, cashed on the Choi by KO prop as well, and that was enough to really salvage the night, save me from having a pretty bad night. So did end up only dropping 0.58 units, not too upset about that, but that'll do it for the recap. Let's get right into this fight card. We only have 12 fights, a number of fights have fallen off. We have a few replacement fights as well, so yeah, this should be a pretty fun card, but let's get right into it. And kicking off the card, we have Yancy Medeiros versus Damir Hadzovic, and this was a fight that was rebooked. This was initially supposed to be on the Garbrandt card, but I don't remember what happened. It ended up getting rescheduled, and this was a fight I already did break down, so I'm just going to queue up the old recording for it. The only thing that's really changed is the line. I think a bit more money has come in on Hadzovic, and I don't know if I can completely agree with that. I did slightly lean towards Hadzovic in the first fight, but ultimately I feel that this fight is pretty close. I don't think the line should be quite this wide. I think it should be more like minus 120, minus 130 Hadzovic, but as it stands right now, he's about like minus 150, so I don't really see any value on either side. And if money keeps coming in on Hadzovic, I think that Medeiros would be the value side here. So that's really the only thing I have to add. Other than that, I'm just gonna queue up this recording here. So here you go. And in the next fight, we have Yancy Medeiros versus Damir Hadzovic. And this is at near a pick'em right now. Medeiros at minus 102 and minus 118 for Hadzovic. So I do agree with this. I mean, this is a pretty close fight. Both guys coming off a pretty long layoff, pretty low-level guys in my opinion. But, looking at Medeiros first, so, his offensive striking is decent, but he is extremely hittable. And, he will get wild in exchanges, and he has taken a ton of damage over the course of his career. He's been finished before, and he's been in wars. And so, yeah, a ton of damage, a ton of wear and tear on this guy. Going back to his most recent fight against Venata, he just wasn't really able to get anything going in that fight. Has looked very much declined, in the past 2-3 years. But yeah, before that Venata fight, he got dominated pretty hard by Gillespie, who, pretty high level, so you can't really put that one against him. But before that, he did go up against Cowboy Cerrone, and looked okay that fight, but was getting countered pretty hard by Cowboy most of that fight, and did end up getting knocked out there. I'd say he peaked when he beat Oliveira in 2017. So yeah, quite a while ago, and ever since then I feel like he's been on a pretty steady decline. And his opponent Hadzovic, I don't think is in a much better situation. I mean, he's pretty aggressively average, if I'm being honest. His striking is a bit stiff. His volume isn't very high, and he will throw the kick, but with not much intention. So just kind of pitter-patter leg kicks, pitter-patter punches, if I'm being honest. And is overall, I feel, a pretty low-level point fighter. He's pretty hittable and doesn't seem to have much of a ground game as well. And it does look like his cardio starts to dip a bit when opponents really make him work. Like if he's the one that's getting pressed, and if he's the one that's being pressured, he does seem to struggle quite a bit. But taking a look at this matchup, it is pretty tough to call just because I think both guys are pretty shot, and they are coming off a rather long layoff too. I mean, I think both guys are, about a year off for both guys, a bit over a year off. And, at this age, at this stage in their career, I don't think that's a really good thing for them. So, pretty close fight, pretty high variance fight in my opinion. Could really swing either way, but if I did have to pick a side, I guess I will go with Medeiros here. I think that, on the feet, he is going to be a bit better. I think he's the better striker. I think that he's got better hands. He's a bit more fluid with the striking, and I do favor Medeiros a bit more as far as level of competition. I think he's fought the much better opponents, in my opinion. That being said, though, I do feel that Medeiros is a little more shot than Hadzovic. I think he's taken a lot more damage over his career, and I think his chin is pretty much gone. But that being said, Hadzovic isn't really like a power punch or anything, so I don't think that Hadzovic will pose much of a threat to Medeiros. Whereas with Medeiros, I feel that he might still have a little bit of power left, and could potentially hurt Hadzovic. But I do see this fight playing pretty close on the feet, so I don't really see a ton of value on either side. But if I did have to make a pick, I'm just gonna go with Yancy Medeiros here. But extremely low confidence pick here. And moving right along, we have Charles Rosa versus Justin Jaynes, and Rosa is the -175 favorite. Comeback on Jaynes is +150, and with Rosa, his striking is decent. I mean, the guy's light on his feet. He mixes it up well, but he doesn't really have much power. The guy's a bit of a point fighter on the feet. He does have a grappling base, but we haven't really seen it on display since his return from injury. Yeah, I mean, he did get an armbar win against Bermudez, but I feel that was a little bit fluky. I don't think that's an outcome that happens too many times, but good for him for pulling it off. But outside of that, it was primarily a stand-up fight against Aguilar, and that was a very questionable decision too. He did throw a little more than Aguilar, but I feel that Aguilar was landing the harder strikes. So that was a fight that could have gone either way, and I think that was a fight that Aguilar arguably won. And even then, that was a win that didn't really age well, as I think Aguilar is likely out of the UFC now. The guy hasn't won since that fight, and I think is on like a 3 or 4 fight losing skid. So that's a win that didn't really age well, even though it was like a very close fight that he could have arguably lost. And then he got pretty much dominated on the ground by Michel, which is somewhat excusable. Michel's a pretty high-level grappler, up-and-coming prospect, so pretty high on him. So that's a fight that you can kind of, write off a little bit, but the guy got absolutely dominated on the ground by Minner as well. He had pretty much nothing to offer up, and that is a fight that is a little more inexcusable, since Minner is the guy's pretty much a regional journeyman, and the guy was able to just hold Rosa down on the ground and pretty much dominate him the whole fight. Rosa didn't have anything to offer off his back, and actually showed kind of bad fight IQ there, because I think he ended up initiating the grappling exchanges later in the fight, even though he was clearly at a disadvantage there, but still decided to go there anyways. I don't really know what he was thinking there. But, he's going to be going up against Justin Jaynes, who honestly is not UFC caliber at all either. The guy is an extremely one-dimensional fighter. I mean, as one-dimensional as one-dimensional gets. The guy pretty much does the same shit every single fight, looks to just wing the hooks and potentially, knock his opponents out. I think this guy's a mid-level regional fighter at best. He's got a bit of upside because he does have power in both hands. The only reason he's in the UFC was, he took advantage of being a short notice fill-in, got matched up against Camacho and just knocked him out that fight. But outside of that, the guy has just not looked good whatsoever in the UFC. I mean, I'm sure he's a good guy, but I mean, he's just not that skilled. His game plan literally just relies on landing a bomb on you. I mean, if you just watch his fights, the guy's doing the same shit every single fight. So I really don't think he belongs in the UFC, but, he's taking full advantage of that short notice fill-in and knocking out Camacho there. But as far as this matchup goes, I have to lean Rosa here ever so slightly, even though Rosa's looked pretty awful so far. I think he's I think he's the better striker. I actually think he's better pretty much everywhere. Jaynes does have that equalizer in his hands. I mean, he's got knockout power, but just doesn't really have much of the skills to back it up at the UFC level. That said, I mean, with how bad Rosa has looked recently, I wouldn't put it past Jaynes to be able to knock him out or even potentially go to his wrestling a bit and kind of test it out, see how Rosa responds. I mean, Rosa has looked pretty bad in his last 2 or 3 fights. Even in the Aguilar fight, he didn't look that great. I mean, the guy was just hitting Aguilar with some pitter patter shots, honestly. So ultimately, I will have to go with Rosa here. I think that if he doesn't get knocked out, he should be able to just outwork Jaynes on the feet. I think he is the better striker. So yeah, again, if he doesn't get knocked out, I think he should be able to cruise to a decision. So yeah, while I am picking Rosa here, there's just no way I'm going to bet Rosa at minus 170, given how bad he's looked in his most recent fight. So pick here is Rosa, but no bet for this fight. And moving along, we have Julija Avila versus Julija Stoliarenko. And this was a fight that has been rebooked as well. Avila is the minus 360 favorite. Comeback on Stoliarenko is plus 285. And let's start with Avila here. So Avila, she definitely seems to have quite a bit of power. She can definitely crack. And on the feet, she really likes to move forward. She's very aggressive, likes to back opponents down, unload on them. She's got good elbows and knees in the clinch. Very nasty combination striking. Does tend to get a little bit wild, but with how much power she has, I think it is a bit of an equalizer, although I'm not really sure how that will translate when she starts fighting higher level opponents, because so far she's really only beaten pretty low level opponents, outside of maybe Pani Kianzad, but outside of that, I don't think she's fought really the best fighters. And, she kind of had her ground game exposed a little bit in her last fight where Sijara Eubanks was having a ton of success just grappling her. And that wasn't a really good look at all whatsoever, because I don't think Sijara Eubanks is that good of a fighter. And if anything, I think that people kind of overrated Sijara after that performance. So that was a very concerning look. But yeah, the defensive grappling of Avila didn't look that great that fight. And against Stoliarenko, I don't think that Stoliarenko is a phenomenal grappler or anything, but that is very concerning, especially for someone who is like a minus 380 favorite. So definitely got to keep that in mind there. But her opponent, Stoliarenko, like I said before, is pretty low level in my opinion. She's very wild on the feet as well. Really likes to wing those overhands. Not very technical, very unpolished. And from what I've seen so far, she's been kind of reliant on just getting those arm bars. I mean, she's got like 6 or 7 arm bars on her record here. And outside of that, I don't think she's quite that good. I've seen her, pull guard. But, in her previous fight against Kunitskaya, she was just completely manhandled in the clinch. Had absolutely nothing to offer. And then before that, in her fight against Lisa Versosa, she pretty much she won a split decision there, but it was a very back and forth fight. She took a ton of damage, showed a lot of toughness in that fight. So she's definitely a tough fighter. Is definitely a dog, but outside of that, I don't think that she is particularly skilled. But taking a look at this matchup, I do have to favor Avila here. I think she's fought the higher level of competition by just a little bit. She does have a slightly more UFC experience, and on the feet I do favor her a little bit more, but not by too much, because I don't think either fighter is really that technical on the feet. I think they're both a little wild, and I think for Stoliarenko, she's a bit armbar or bust essentially. But this could potentially be a very back and forth fight, because like I said before, Stoliarenko is she's a dog, and she will take damage, she will take her punishment, but she will also move forward and do damage herself. So this could potentially be a very back and forth fight, assuming Avila isn't able to get her out of there. I guess Avila does have the knockout upside. She does have a lot of early round finishes, but Stoliarenko is really tough. She took a ton of damage from Versosa and was able to move through it. And that was, I believe, a 5-round fight too. So she took a ton of damage that fight and was still able to make it to a decision. And this was a fight where I had initially thought I might look to parlay Avila or even play Avila inside the distance. But that last performance for Avila is really just what's putting me off. and I think she still is somewhat unproven, so I don't think it's really worth laying the minus like 360 or so on her, especially since this fight could potentially play out close if it goes to a decision. And with her grappling deficiencies, if Stoliarenko is able to get her to the ground, this could potentially be a very dicey fight for her. So, I do have to lean towards Avila here, but this is, I think, a pass for me at this point. And in the next fight, we have Marcin Prachnio versus Ike Villanueva, and Prachnio's the minus 210 favorite, come back on Villanueva's plus 180, and never would I imagine Prachnio being a favorite, much less a minus 200 favorite in the UFC. What a world, man. This line is crazy. This line is a joke, honestly. This fight is a joke. Two very low-level fighters. I don't really know if I have much to break down here, but I'll do it anyways. So Prachnio, the guy's been knocked out in his first 3 UFC fights, and in pretty brutal fashion. He's likely on the cusp of getting cut, but was able to bounce back against a very inconsistent Roundtree, and his fight IQ, his chin is all just a major concern for me, especially his fight against Sam Alvey, where, his hands were low, he gets clipped and continues to move forward with his hands down and eats like 3 or 4 clean hooks before finally getting the TKO stoppage there. Then in his next fights, he proceeds to get knocked out, with the head kick and then with elbows to the head. So, this guy's taken a ton of damage already, and he finally was able to bounce back against Roundtree, where, we finally got to see what he was potentially, capable of. And, on the feet, his striking honestly isn't that great. He's a bit stiff. He's a bit slow also. But, he does move somewhat well, does have a decent kicking game. And even in the Roundtree fight, Roundtree was hurting him in certain moments, but ultimately he was able to stay on the outside and just outpoint Roundtree. His opponent, Ike Villanueva, pretty low level as well. And from what I've seen with him, he's pretty one-dimensional, really just likes to pressure opponents, kind of move in with the hooks. Does swing a little wild, will work the body, but overall he's just not a very layered striker, pretty one-dimensional. And, I don't know how well his power is going to translate to the UFC. He has a lot of KOs on the regional scene, but really only one in the UFC, and that was against Vinicius Moreira, who's probably one of the chinniest fighters on the roster, or I don't even know if he's on the roster anymore, but probably the only guy I think is more chinny than Prachnio. But taking a look at this matchup, I just feel the line is off. I think it's way off, actually. Prachnio as minus 200 is just kind of egregious, even though, Villanueva is not that skilled of a fighter. I don't think he's that good. But I really don't think that Prachnio should be this big of a favorite, and it's kind of surprising the line is kind of held here. I guess no one's really jumping in line to really put money on Villanueva, but I think that this is a fight where if it does go to a decision, it could potentially be close. I guess I do slightly favor Prachnio in the sense that he's a bit more of a point fighter. His striking is actually a little more dynamic than Villanueva, whereas with Villanueva, he's, again, very one-dimensional, a bit of a headhunter. And I think that Prachnio does have the size advantage over Villanueva, but Villanueva should have the quicker hands. He should be a little quicker in there. But ultimately, I feel that Villanueva should have the KO upside just because we've seen Prachnio hurt so many times, and Villanueva should have the speed and potentially the power to get Prachnio out of there, although I definitely do see a scenario where Prachnio is able to just outpoint Villanueva. So, ultimately, I just feel the line is off. I've already taken a half-unit shot on Villanueva. Nothing too crazy here because, again, Villanueva's a very low-level fighter. But, yeah, this is a pretty low-level fight. And in terms of pick, I'm just going to go with Villanueva here. There's no way I'm taking Prachnio here. And I really don't think anyone should be playing Prachnio straight. I don't think anyone should be putting Prachnio in their parlays at all. But hey, more power to you if you are. So the pick here is Villanueva, and I've taken really just a half-unit shot on him, really just to fade Prachnio. And a fun little degenerate parlay for you guys out there if you're interested. It's the hooks-only parlay. Ike Villanueva by KO TKO and Justin Jaynes by KO TKO. Pretty self-explanatory in my opinion. Two pretty one-dimensional fighters who are really just looking to spam hooks in there. The props haven't come out yet, but I'm guessing that it'll probably be like plus 2,500 at least. So a little fun one. Definitely won't be tracking this, but probably will just put like a tenner on it or something. And moving right along, we have Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Michel Prazeres. And Rakhmonov's the minus 265 favorite, come back on Prazeres as plus 225. And Prazeres, the guy's an absolute tank of a man. Although, not so much these days anymore. I mean, the muscle mass is still there, but the definition definitely isn't. But, can't really blame the guy. He's getting a bit older. The fact that he still looks, that jacked is kind of impressive. But, he is a high-level athlete. And, but yeah, going back to Prazeres, so the guy is very stocky, very explosive striking. Although, I believe most recently the only person he's really been able to hurt on the feet is Fabinski. Outside of that, the guy's primarily just been grinding guys out. Or getting them out of there by submission. His striking is a bit wild, but again, he really is just looking to close the distance as he is primarily a grappler. But at this point in his career, the cardio just isn't there anymore. At 39, he's progressively looked worse in each fight since 2018. And, an argument could be made that, he lost to Green and Cummings and should potentially be, like 1-3, or 1-3 in his last 4 fights. And the guy just looked awful against Nardiev in his most recent fight, where, he was fighting Nardiev, who was coming in on short notice and was still getting reversed by Nardiev despite being the better grappler, which is a pretty bad look. And on the feet, Nardiev was just giving him a ton of trouble. So I don't think it'd be too controversial of a statement to say this guy's pretty washed. And he's going up against a pretty solid prospect in Shavkat Rakhmonov. I'm not as high on this guy as other people might be. A lot of people were all over him against Alex Oliveira, and it seems like the UFC is pretty high on this guy as well. They've booked him against some pretty solid fighters for his UFC debut. They tried to book him against Fabinski, who, I guess Fabinski's not that good, but they booked him against Amiv as well, and Elizu Zaleski dos Santos, who is a pretty solid fighter as well. So, yeah, the UFC, I think, likes this guy. I think they see some potential in him. And, don't get me wrong, I do think he is a solid fighter, but I guess I'm just not that high on him just yet. I'd like to see a little more from him at the UFC level before making any sort of judgment on him. But, going back to Rakhmonov, the guy is a bit of a counterpuncher. He can have some moments of inactivity, but, if he does land, he will follow up and swarm opponents. The guy has crazy killer instinct. He's got, really good knees up in the clinch as well. Does seem to have some power in his shots. His takedown defense does seem solid as well. Digs the underhooks well. Haven't seen him too much on the back. Haven't really seen his jiu-jitsu being tested. With that said, I don't think that Prazeres is going to be that big of a threat on the ground this late in his career, unless Rakhmonov is just an absolute white belt on the ground. But from what I've seen in limited tape, of his defensive grappling, he does seem proficient there. So I think he should be able to fend off the submissions, shuck off the takedowns, and likely keep the fight standing long enough to really either win on the cards or potentially even put Prazeres out. It's just that I really don't think Prazeres is quite that good anymore. I think the guy is way past his prime. He's way past his physical prime as well. So this is going to be a pretty tough fight for Prazeres, honestly. So as far as the pick goes, I will have to go with Rakhmonov here. As far as betting tips, I don't know if I want to play him straight. I think he'd be a pretty safe parlay piece. I really don't see Prazeres really being able to pull a win out of his ass here. So yeah, I got to go with Rakhmonov here. I honestly think he should be able to touch up Prazeres pretty bad on the feet. I think that he should be able to win the decision here. Prazeres is pretty tough, but I wouldn't be completely surprised if he knocked him out. So yeah, the pick here is Rakhmonov, and I think he's a decent parlay piece. And in the next fight, we have Raoni Barcelos versus Timur Valiev, and Barcelos is the minus 230 favorite. Comeback on Valiev is plus 195, and man, this is a great fight. Probably the most excited for this fight outside of the main event, and I think they're actually going to make this fight the featured prelim bout, but I honestly think this could be the co-main, and I think there's potential fight of the night bonus or fight of the night potential outside of maybe the main event. But this is a great fight, very high level fight. Should be a lot of back and forth. Should be a pretty high paced fight too. And with Barcelos, so the guy's a very, very good fighter, extremely well rounded. His boxing is on point, very slick boxing. Honestly, the guy looked fantastic in his last time out against Taha. Looked great on the feet, looked great on the ground. The guy's grappling is very solid as well. It's honestly a shame this guy's getting zero push from the UFC. He's been fighting prospect after prospect, and even though he's been beating them, he really hasn't been able to just get that step up in competition. I guess they did match him up with Assunção, but I'm like 95% sure that Assunção just ducked this guy because I don't think he wants to fight Barcelos and potentially lose his ranking. And now Barcelos is going to get matched up against another prospect in Valiev, who is no slouch, if I'm being honest. And at 34, it's gonna be rough for Barcelos. He's really gonna need to make a crazy push if he wants any shot at the title. But before he can even think about that, he's gonna have to get through Valiev. And like I said before, I think Valiev is a really solid prospect. The guy is a very well-rounded fighter as well. His striking is solid, throws very heavy on the feet. The guy is extremely explosive, loads up pretty big on his punches and kicks. He does have really solid wrestling as well. Again, this guy is very well-rounded. That said, though, he has had a pretty shaky UFC run. He gets matched up against Trevin Jones in his UFC debut. The guy is piecing up Jones on the feet. He's lighting him up in the first round and then just gets caught in the second round, gets put out. And that was a fight where, honestly, he could have potentially got a stoppage in the first round, but the ref let Jones fight on there, and Jones was able to pull off a comeback win in the second round. And then in a second fight in the UFC, he gets matched up with Martin Day. I'd say a pretty significant step down. Day is, I don't think, UFC caliber, and he just goes in there and he plays it safe, which, I'm not really against. The guy did get knocked out in his previous fight. I think he just needed another win. He just needed to get back into the win column, and just was able to take Day down and pretty much just grind him out, use his wrestling. And so far he hasn't really lived up to the hype, but I still think that he is a really solid fighter, very well-rounded. Not too many weaknesses aside from the fact that, he does seem to overswing a little bit when he's on the feet. But, as far as this matchup goes, I slightly lean towards Barcelos, but I feel the line is a bit wide. I don't think that Barcelos should be this big of a favorite. Barcelos, he's a bit more proven. He does have the UFC experience, but all in all, the guy has beaten primarily prospects. You can argue that Gutierrez isn't really a prospect. He's, had a few fights in the UFC, but Gutierrez I don't think is that high level. And this may be a bit controversial, but I do think that Barcelos is riding a bit of hype. Maybe not, in the general public's eye, but, I definitely think as far as the betting community goes and as far as, I guess the more hardcore fans go, he is riding a bit of hype. I think they've recognized that he is good. And don't get me wrong, I do think that he is good, but I don't think that he's that good. I mean, he needs to be a little more proven. Even though he's looked really solid so far, I think he hasn't really taken that step up in competition for me to really, truly believe he's going to be a title contender or anything. But people are talking about him like this guy's going to go on a crazy title run or something. So before everyone just completely shits on me, I do think that Barcelos is good. I mean, the guys look good. It's undeniable, but I think he is riding a little bit of hype. And you can kind of see it in the line here. The guy's a massive favorite against Valiev, who I think is a really solid fighter too. I mean, on the feet, I think that it should be a pretty close fight. I think that Barcelos is a bit more technical. I think his boxing is a bit slicker. And I think he should edge it out by a bit. I think he's probably got the volume advantage well on the feet, but I definitely think the power advantage lies with Valiev. I think he's the far more explosive fighter. I mean, the guy, the way he loads up on some of his kicks, like I was surprised that Jones was able to take that much damage from him. But yeah, Valiev, he's a big hitter, and I don't think he could be taken, or I don't think Barcelos can be taken too many of those, body kicks or even shots from Valiev for too long on the feet. And on the ground, I think that whoever is the one to initiate the grappling will likely be the one that pulls out ahead. I think that if Valiev is, shooting takedowns, if he's initiating the grappling, I think that he could have a lot of success, holding Barcelos down and potentially getting a bit of control time and winning on the cards that way. But I do think that on the feet, he is potentially live for the knockout as well. I mean, I don't think the power of Valiev can be understated. The guy's extremely explosive, if I haven't said that enough. But I do favor Barcelos in the sense that I think he's a bit more technical. He is sharper, and maybe on the ground. And as far as like the jiu-jitsu goes, he could be, or I would say he's probably higher level than Valiev. But I don't think he's just going to go in there and just submit Valiev. I don't think he's just going to be able to completely wrestle fuck him or anything. I think it's going to be a pretty close fight wherever the fight takes place. And at 34 for Barcelos, I definitely do feel that is somewhat concerning. I mean, he looked fantastic against Taha, not going to lie there, but at 34 at bantamweight, I think that the cliff is right around the corner. You can't be fighting at that high of a level, I don't think, for that long. So maybe it doesn't happen here in this fight, but regardless, I think it is going to be a close fight, and the age is just not going to help here. So as far as the pick goes, my official pick, it will be Barcelos. I think he is a bit better everywhere, but I did take a 1-unit shot on Valiev. I think the line is way off here. I think that this is a pretty competitive fight. And I think there's a decent chance that Valiev could potentially steal a decision or even knock Barcelos out. So I got to go with Barcelos in terms of a pick, but I do have a 1-unit bet placed on Valiev at plus 195. Jesus Christ. And moving right along, we have a banger of a fight. Renato Moicano versus Herbert. Or is it Jay Herbert? I'm not sure. I think I've heard it both ways, but I'll just call him Jai Herbert since I think that's what the Cage Warriors announcers called him. But Moicano's the minus 250 favorite. Comeback on Herbert is plus 210. And interesting fact about Herbert, his cousin Rudy actually plays in the NBA. But for Herbert, his striking is solid. The guy is got very accurate hands, has a very deadly straight right, very dangerous knees in the clinch as well. He likes to pressure opponents. He moves well on the feet. His takedown defense is decent. I mean, it's not great, but it's not terrible. However, I have seen him held on the ground for extended periods of time, and I have seen him held up against the cage as well. I think that a solid grappler can definitely have a lot of success against him. I'm not sure how good some of these Cage Warrior guys are, but I see a lot of the time they have a bit of success in the grappling, and then as soon as they stand him back up or he's able to get back to his feet, he just puts him out. So I don't think these guys are like career grapplers. I think they potentially gas themselves out trying to hold him down, and he's able to take advantage. So I don't know what to quite make of this, but I don't think that it's a particularly good look on Herbert's end. I think that when he starts facing better grapplers in the UFC, he could have a lot of trouble there. And, that is a bit troublesome because he is going up against a really high-level grappler in Moicano. And even though that is the case with Moicano, I think that the guy has fallen in love with his hands a bit recently. And I completely understand why. The guy he's very dangerous on the feet. He's got great killer instinct as well. But the issue with him is defensively, he just doesn't really move his head. And it does seem like he might have some durability issues, even though his knockout losses have been against some really solid strikers in, Fiziev, the Korean Zombie, and Jose Aldo. So, he did get knocked out in 3 of his last 4 fights. But, these are really high-level guys, really solid striking. And, they were able to catch him pretty clean on the chin. So right now, Moicano's in a pretty weird spot where it's kind of hard to get a good read on him because, he's been knocked out 3 times in his last 4 fights, but you do have to consider that, they're against better, high-level opponents, but at the same time did also get knocked out 3 times. That's definitely a concern regardless of, whether or not they're high level. With that said, though, Moicano is still very dangerous on the feet, and he is very dangerous on the ground as well. And something I forgot to mention about Herbert is he did get knocked out twice in his career, and one of those knockouts was against Francisco Trinaldo in his most recent fight, actually, where he got caught in the 3rd round after doing some pretty good work against Trinaldo on the feet. And, he got caught pretty clean there, got put out. And, before that, his other knockout loss was to Reese McKee back in 2016. So I feel like I'm in a pretty weird spot in terms of what to think of these guys' durability, because I don't want to completely write off the chin of Herbert just yet, but he does have 2 knockout losses. One was against Reese McKee on the regional scene a while ago, so you can argue that maybe he was still young in his career. It was a little while ago. Maybe that isn't something that happens too much. And then he also did get caught against Ronaldo, which you can argue, Ronaldo, veteran, lots of power, catches him clean, puts him out. So you can kind of make excuses for that, but at the same time, the guy did get put out twice. So, I think this is a very weird spot for both fighters where, on paper it does look like they could potentially be chinny, but these are also fights you can kind of make excuses for. So I'm going to lean towards the fact that their durability might be a little suspect. And this is a fight where both guys are pretty dangerous, on the feet. So I think the angle here is potentially the under, assuming that it isn't completely juiced, which I feel like it might be because both guys have been knocked out before. Both guys are extremely dangerous on the feet, and for Moicano, he's dangerous on the ground too. So I think it's going to likely be lined at, under 1.5, probably like minus 150, minus 160 or so. If it goes above that, it might be a little dicey because I don't want to overblow the potential durability issues of these guys, even though I think that would be the more obvious take. So I like the under 1.5, but it really will come down to what the line is going to look like for that. But, going back to this fight, I do favor Moicano here. I think that he's the better striker. I think that he's the better grappler. The only question mark about him is, how shot is his chin, right? And this is going to be a good fight to find out. So I do favor Moicano, but I don't know if I want to lay the minus 260 on him since the durability issues are a bit of a concern. So if anything, maybe just look to take Moicano inside the distance or possibly Moicano by sub, because I do feel that there are some holes in Herbert's defensive grappling, and if Moicano is able to take advantage of that, I do think that he can take Herbert down and potentially even sub him there, because I think there's going to be a pretty big skill gap there. Although I definitely do see Moicano potentially knocking Herbert out too, because Moicano's got pretty dangerous striking. People forget that even though he did get knocked out by Fiziev, he was actually, I think he was actually landing pretty clean on Fiziev too. So yeah, that was actually a pretty close fight up until the point he got knocked out. So Moicano's got really solid striking. And as far as Herbert goes, I think that he could potentially get the knockout as well. I mean, the guy's got, very dangerous straight right, and does seem to have a bit of power, although it's primarily been at the regional scene. I don't know how well that's going to translate to the UFC, but I do think that he definitely has a bit of a shot to get the knockout here too. So the official pick here is going to be Moicano. I think he gets it done by submission. But as far as bets go, this might just be a better fight to target the props for. And moving right along, we have Tim Means versus Nicolas Dalby. And this is a very interesting fight because both of these guys, their original opponents actually dropped out of this fight, and now they get to fight each other. So, yeah, Tim Means, he's got pretty slick boxing in my opinion. He's great at pumping the jab out, quick 1-2 down the pipe, mixes up the striking really well. I like how he digs to the body as well. He will mix in the leg kicks occasionally, but that isn't a huge part of his game, even though I think that it could help him a lot if he's able to consistently go to the leg kicks. He has shown he could hit some offensive takedowns as well, and his offensive wrestling has been slowly incorporated into his game lately. But as far as his defensive wrestling goes, though, it is still a little bit spotty in my opinion. But all in all, I think Means is just a very slick striker with decent grappling. His opponent Dalby is, I think, pretty similar in that regards. He's a solid striker. Has got that karate stance, point fighting style, but will mix in the wrestling as well. So both guys, I think, pretty well rounded. Although both guys are primarily strikers. However, with Dalby, I think he does go to his kicking game a little bit more. And, I do favor the youth of Dalby a little bit more, as Tim Means, he's a bit older. And the durability issues are definitely a concern with him. But as far as this matchup goes, I have to side with Tim Means here. I think that he is the better striker. I think he's more skilled on the feet. He's got more UFC experience. I think he's fought the higher level of competition. But again, the big concern for him is the durability, and I really don't think that can be understated here. Dalby, he's not exactly a power puncher by any means. He is a bit more of a point fighter, but, we did actually see him rock Rodriguez a bit in his last fight. And, going back to Tim Means, though, it was only a couple fights ago where he was hurt by Rodriguez and, eventually got choked out that fight, after he got dropped. But this was against Rodriguez, who I don't really think is a power puncher either. I mean, yeah, Rodriguez does have a knockout over Dwight Grant as well in the UFC, but that was a fight where Grant had Rodriguez hurt and was actually, I think he punched himself out and, left a pretty big opening for Rodriguez to pretty much finish him there. So all in all, I just don't think that Rodriguez really is is a big power puncher. Because the only other finish he's had outside of Tim Means was, against Dwight Grant there. And, if you look at a ton of his other fights, I mean, the guy landed 175 significant strikes against Gabe Green, didn't finish him. Landed 108 strikes against Rico Farrington, didn't finish him. Landed 129 strikes against Mike Perry, didn't finish him either. Granted, it was Mike Perry, the guy's pretty durable. But what I'm trying to say here is I don't think Rodriguez is a big finishing threat, and he was able to hurt Means pretty bad. So ultimately what I'm trying to say is that I don't think you really need to be a big power puncher or to be a very heavy hitter to be putting Means out at this stage in his career. The guy's taken a ton of damage. He's a bit older, and I don't think that durability is getting any better. So against someone like Dalby, who, again, I don't feel is a big knockout guy, I think that still is definitely live in this situation, considering I think this will primarily be a stand-up fight. So I am going to pick Means here, but I don't think I can really bet Means at as a favorite. Honestly, I think he's a solid bet as a dog, but with the potential durability issues, it's just really hard to take him as a favorite, really over anyone at this point. So I'm going to take Means here, but I don't think I'll bet on this fight. This is a good one to just sit back and watch, because this should be a pretty fun striking match. And moving right along, we have Andre Fili versus Daniel Pineda, and Fili's the minus 225 favorite. Comeback on Pineda is plus 190. And let's start with Pineda first. So this is his second stint in the UFC, and I definitely think he is a veteran of the sport. His game is very well-rounded. He's got pretty decent striking, very heavy leg kicks, does have a strong jiu-jitsu base. His wrestling seems solid as well, just overall a pretty well-rounded fighter, but he's getting a bit older. He's 35, and he does have a lot of fight miles. He has taken a decent amount of damage over the course of his career as well. So he makes his return to the UFC, and in that return fight, he's able to derail a somewhat hyped prospect in Herbert Burns. I don't think he was actually that hyped, but being the brother of Gilbert Burns, he's got a little bit of hype behind him. Is able to beat him pretty handily in that fight, and shows up against Swanson in his second return fight to the UFC. He's really feeling himself, and you could see the confidence coming from him in that fight. He's walking down Cub Swanson, hands down, doesn't really show Swanson any sort of respect in that fight, and pretty much gets clipped late in the first and is eventually finished in the second. I think that he was still hurt in that second round from that first round knockdown, and I think what happened leading up into that was he kind of gassed himself out after that first grappling exchange in the first round, because the guy just looked just completely gassed, if I'm being honest. I don't know if I'm misreading it or if anyone feels the same way, but he looked really tired after that first grappling exchange, and Swanson was able to just find the chin because the guy just wasn't able to put his hands up. He wasn't able to move his head out of the way quick enough either, and eventually Swanson was able to get him out of there. And that is a concern going into this fight. I mean, the guy is 35, fighting at a lighter weight class. And, he is supposedly coming off a PED suspension as well, so you don't really know how much of an effect that's having on his cardio and his athleticism. His opponent, Andre Fili, is a pretty well-rounded fighter as well. He's got solid striking, solid grappling. He's pretty serviceable everywhere. He's actually quite big for the division as well, very tall and lanky. The real issue with him, though, is his fight IQ. You really can't trust Fili to stick to a game plan or even take the path of least resistance. And, I mean, a very clear example of this was in his most recent fight against Charles Jourdain, where The easiest path to victory would just be with the wrestling, but he did decide to keep it standing against Jourdain and was getting beat there by Jourdain. And anytime Fili took him down, he was having a lot of success there on the ground, but the fight ended up being on the feet way longer than it should be, and the fight ended up being much closer than it should have been. And honestly, that could have been a fight that could have gotten scored for Jourdain, but thanks to the wrestling of Fili, which he didn't really even do much with, I think, in the second round, he was able to edge out a decision. It was a split decision win, ultimately. But at the end of the day, what I am trying to say is you really can't trust Fili to stick to a game plan or even take a fight to where it needs to go for him to win. So while I am picking Fili to win here, I don't know if I want to lay the minus 250 on him. I mean, he's got all the skills and the physical tools to win this matchup pretty handily, but again, I just don't really trust him to. So with Fili, I think that he is probably the better striker. He's going to be the taller, the bigger guy in there. He should be able to keep it at range and honestly pick Pineda apart. And if he does decide to go with the wrestling, he could potentially take and hold Pineda down as well, because we have seen Pineda start to slow down a bit, and if Fili puts on a pace against Pineda, he could win a decision here, but you really just can't trust Fili. I mean, he could potentially just choke this fight away or find some way to lose this fight. So yeah, the pick here is Fili, but in my opinion, I think Fili is pretty unbettable at minus odds. You'd have to take him as a dog or at least near pick him to really take a shot on him. Even though this fight does feel like a fight he should win, I don't see too many paths to victory for Pineda outside of maybe like a freak submission, or maybe if it's a really low-paced fight and Fili is just kind of messing around in there, it could potentially be a really close decision. And I mean, Fili has gone on record saying that with these fights, he's just looking to have some fun out there, first and foremost. So, good for him for wanting to do that. And, as a fan, I don't have too much against that. But as someone who is potentially looking to put a bit of money on him, that is not something you want to hear. So, yeah, the pick here is Fili, but I likely won't be putting money on his money line. If the Fili by decision prop is a good plus number, I might take a shot on that, because Fili historically has been a bit of a decisionator. He does have a couple knockout wins on his record, but generally Daniel Pineda is pretty tough unless, he's gassing himself out. But for the most part, the guy has been relatively tough. So yeah, the pick here is Fili, but I don't recommend playing him straight. All right, in the next fight we have Danilo Marques versus Kennedy Nchukwu, and Marques is the minus 130 favorite. Comeback on Nchukwu is plus 100. And with Marques, I don't think the guy's UFC caliber whatsoever, but he has been able to eke out a couple wins in the UFC. The guy's a grappler through and through. I mean, his striking is pretty non-existent. He's extremely stiff on the feet, but he will look to get the fight to the ground. If not, look to just press opponents up against the cage. Maybe look for a sweep there, but overall, I'd say his wrestling isn't that great. And, if he's not able to get you down, he will, again, just look to kind of cage push and kind of stall a bit on the cage. However, if he does get you on the ground, you are in a bit of trouble. He will look to usually hold position there. I mean, he will hunt the submission, but he's content to just sit in a dominant position and kind of just ride you out from there. He does have a solid BJJ base, but I don't know quite how good it is at the UFC level. He did get a submission over Mike Rodriguez, but Rodriguez really isn't that good either. He was able to grind out a decision against Ibragimov in his debut, but again, Ibragimov is extremely low level, and that was a very unimpressive fight, honestly. He was really just able to just grind up on Ibragimov, hold him up against the cage, and it was a very low output fight, generally just pretty unimpressive, and I don't think the guy's cardio is that great either. He was able to fight a pretty mid-pace sort of grappling fight against these guys, but again, neither of these guys are really good grapplers. I don't think they put up too much resistance against him, and so he was able to get by against those guys, although I just don't think that his cardio is really that great. His opponent, Kennedy Nchukwu, I don't think is that great either. He is very young, though, so he is still making improvements. The guy's primarily a stand-up fighter, He's really tall and lanky for the division. I actually think Marques is actually a bit taller than Kennedy, although that doesn't really seem right. I think they might potentially have some of the heights wrong, but it does look like Nchukwu has the reach advantage, which makes sense. I mean, the guy's got really long arms, and he does a decent job fighting long. I mean, he pumps the jab out well. He uses his kicks really well, and does have a pretty dangerous knee up the middle. His output isn't that great either. He primarily just throws single strikes, and just overall, I don't think his striking is that good. I mean, there is a reason this guy was like a plus 250 underdog against a 3-0 Carlos Olberg, who was making his debut. So, he did get to win that fight, but that wasn't a pretty fight either. As far as his defensive grappling goes, it leaves a bit to be desired as well. I mean, he did get a submission loss against Craig, even though he was kind of beating him pretty thoroughly for most of that fight. But, Paul Craig, the guy is a submission specialist and has a habit of, pulling submissions out of his ass in the third round. And that's exactly what happened there. He did get taken down a few times by Darko Stosic as well. But generally, I don't think his takedown defense is great. Well, I think his takedown defense is okay, actually, but his bottom game, his defensive grappling is not that good. And against someone like Marques, that's not a great sign. And usually I probably would look to take Nchukwu here, especially at slight dog odds. But his defensive grappling tendencies are just a bit of a concern for me right now. With that said, though, I think I will have to side with Nchukwu in terms of a pick. I think that on the feet, he is the better striker. He's going to be, or he should be able to keep it long, be able to just outpoint Marques on the feet. But Marques is definitely going to look to try and get this to the ground as soon as possible. And I haven't seen enough from Nchukwu's defensive grappling to make me really confident enough to bet him. So while I do think Nchukwu is better on the feet, I think that there is a decent chance that Marques may be able to maybe just hold him up against the cage, accumulate a bit of control time, and possibly even get the sub, because I don't think that Nchukwu's jiu-jitsu or defensive jiu-jitsu is quite at that level just yet. That said, I don't think that Marques is like elite jiu-jitsu guy either. So I do understand why the line is a bit close here. But I do want to see a bit more from Nchukwu before putting any money on him against a decent grappler like Marques. But the pick here is gonna be Nchukwu here. I think he gets it done on the feet. I think should be able to outpoint Marques. I really don't think Marques is that good. And something to note also is that Nchukwu is coming in short notice, so that may be a bit of a concern, considering Marques will have a full camp here and he will be looking to grapple. In a grapple-heavy fight, I tend to favor the guy who's been in a longer camp, who's had the full camp, versus the guy who's coming in short notice. I think this is a really close fight, tough fight to call, but I am going to side with Nchukwu here, and I think he gets it done by decision. And in the co-main event, we have Ovince St. Preux versus Tanner Boser, and Boser's the minus 190 favorite. Comeback on OSP is plus 165. And Boser is actually coming in short notice for this fight. He's filling in for Maxime Grishin. St. Preux does seem to have a full training camp for this fight, so definitely something to consider here. But starting with OSP here first. So he's a pretty well-rounded fighter. He's definitely a veteran of the sport. He's got that hands-down sort of style, mixes it up well, has a snapping body kick that he likes to throw. He did used to wrestle a little bit before, but I think that as he's gotten older, the cardio just isn't quite there anymore, so he doesn't really go to it as much. He will go to it, but it's not like a huge part of his game. He does have his patented Von Flue choke that he likes to pull off, but again, with his cardio, I don't think that's something that he's looking to really hunt. But it is something that if it does present itself, he will attack it. But ultimately, the issue with OSP at this point is the age. And, we kind of saw it in his most recent fight against Jamal Hill. Granted, Jamal Hill is a much younger fighter who's got good hands, good power. And, at this age, OSP, his durability is starting to go. The cardio is starting to go. So, he's on a bit of a decline, but, the skills, I believe, are still there, as we've seen in the Alonzo Menefield fight, where a lot of people were taking Menefield, but the guy just put on a vet lesson there, was able to really just piece up Menefield at range, and Menefield really struggled closing the distance against OSP. And the fight before that, he actually fought at heavyweight against Ben Rothwell, where he was going up against a legit heavyweight in Rothwell, and Rothwell was able to really just bully him in the clinch, used his size effectively there. And this is a fight against Tanner Boser, where I believe they are fighting at heavyweight. And while Boser is a heavyweight, I think that his frame is more suited towards light heavyweight. Like I actually mentioned this in the Latifi breakdown before, but with Boser, while he is a bit undersized at heavyweight, he'd be a pretty massive light heavyweight. And like I said before, I think his measurables are pretty much the same as Volkan Oezdemir, which is kind of crazy to think about. So yeah, I think these guys should size up pretty well. In fact, I think OSP might actually be the slightly bigger guy. I think his frame is actually a little bit bigger than Boser's. So with Boser, again, he moves pretty well on his feet. Doesn't seem to have much power at heavyweight, although just don't really know how that's going to translate, fighting against smaller fighters, right? And we did see him clip Latifi in his last fight, although that was a really weird shot. It might have been a shot where it kind of just grazed his temple and really wobbled Latifi there. But ultimately, I'm just not completely sold on the Boser has no power narrative. I don't think he has much power at heavyweight, but when he's fighting guys who are usually fighting at light heavyweight, I do think that some of that power will translate. But yeah, on the feet, Boser, he moves really well. He's got good combination striking. He's got good volume striking in general. But, we saw in his last fight really just the holes in his ground game. And while I don't think that OSP is quite the wrestler that Latifi is, I think that there is a pretty big hole there for him to potentially exploit. But like I said before, OSP really hasn't gone to his grappling lately. And in his most recent fight against Hill, that probably would have been his best path to victory, but he didn't really go there at all. So I can't really count on him to go to his grappling in this fight. But on the feet, I do think that OSP can definitely keep it close. I don't think that Boser is going to completely blow OSP out of the water here. So the line being where it is right now, I definitely feel that is a bit wide, considering Boser is coming in short notice for this fight. And while I don't think he's going to be completely out of shape for this fight, just not having a fight camp is definitely going to be a bit of a factor, especially if OSP decides to wrestle here. I don't think that he will, but if he does, I think it'll definitely play to OSP's advantage. And in recent interviews, Boser was actually saying how he's looking to get a finish this fight because of the potential bad reffing. And I don't know about that. I mean, the guy spent 7-8 minutes on his back in his most recent fight against Latifi, and he's talking about it potentially being a robbery. I mean, honestly, the guy just sounds a bit salty, but if he is looking to get the finish here, I wouldn't be completely surprised, since OSP's durability is starting to wane. And with Boser, while he has historically not been a big power puncher, I do think that his power might translate a little better against, guys who are usually fighting at light heavyweight. So I wouldn't be completely shocked here, but I don't think it's too likely. I mean, guys like to say they're going to get the knockout a lot during interviews, and I'm sure that he does want to get the knockout, but I don't know if that's really going to happen here. But going back to this fight, I do think that on the feet it can be pretty competitive. I don't think that Boser's just going to go in here and light up OSP on the feet. I mean, he could with how bad OSP has looked recently, but I do think that OSP does have a little bit left in the tank, so I do think that it'll be a competitive fight on the feet. And if it does go to the ground, I do have to favor OSP, man. I think that after seeing Boser's last fight, he definitely should be drilling a bit of the wrestling, look to take the fight to the ground, look to control Boser there and potentially work that submission. But ultimately, as far as a pick goes, I will have to side with Boser, because I think that unless OSP decides to take a wrestling-heavy game plan, I do think that Boser should be able to outpoint OSP on the feet. Even though I do think it's going to be close, I do edge it towards Boser. But as far as bets go, I think that OSP is the value side, and I might actually end up taking a small shot on the OSP money line, just because I do think that, again, on the feet it will be competitive. But what it'll come down to is if OSP will decide to wrestle. And if he does and is somehow able to get Boser to the ground, I think that he could grind out a decision or potentially even get the sub. So just waiting for the sub prop to come out, actually. And if it's a good number, I might put a little bit on that as well. But I don't think I'll be playing Tanner Boser straight or be putting him in parlays at all. I think that his ground game is a massive liability. So the pick here is Boser, but I do think the value side is OSP. And in the main event, we have Alexander Volkov versus Cyril Gane. And Volkov is the plus 152 underdog, and Gane is the minus 177 favorite. And this is a very interesting matchup. I think that since the heavyweight division is so shallow, it's a real treat when we get two high-level guys going at it. So let's start with Gane first. So, this guy's got phenomenal footwork for a heavyweight. The guy's very light on his feet. He's got great technique. He's got great feints. Mixes it up well on all three levels. Just overall a very good striker. Even though he is a bit green, he has shown a lot of skills on the feet, and the way he was able to just shut Rosenstruck down, completely nullify his offense, was really impressive. Granted, Rosenstruck didn't really make any sort of adjustments that fight, but it was still a very impressive game plan that he was able to execute. And I don't think we've really seen his grappling being tested, even though he does have a couple submission wins in the UFC. They're against really low-level guys, and they were kind of fluky, in my opinion. It does show that he is proficient with the jiu-jitsu, but some people are out here saying this guy's got a phenomenal grappling game or he's got solid jiu-jitsu or something. But, I don't think heel hooking Don'Tale Mayes and, arm triangling Rafael Pessoa is really much to write home about. It's definitely a positive, but I don't want to go and say that this guy's like a solid jiu-jitsu practitioner or anything. That said, though, I don't think that it'll matter too much for this fight because I do think that this fight will primarily be standing. And when it comes to the striking, I do think that Gane will likely have the volume advantage. The guy's got good volume. He's got a good pace that he sets, and people do kind of knock the power of Gane a little bit, saying he doesn't really have any knockout power. And I kind of do agree with that, but I kind of don't. So the reasoning I say that is because while he's not like to the level of guys like Ngannou or Rosenstruck or even Derek Lewis, he's got decent power. I don't think you want to be taking too many clean shots from him. He's just not like the type of guy that would completely put you out. But if you're eating a few clean shots from him, he definitely can hurt you and he definitely can put you out. But yeah, I do feel that at the end of the day, he is a bit more of a volume guy. And as far as the cardio goes, it definitely checks out, although I don't think he's been truly tested for 5 rounds. He did go 5 rounds against Rosenstruck, but that was pretty much one-way traffic and was pretty much a blowout in my opinion. Rosenstruck never really pushed the pace. He never really made Gane work there. So his 5-round cardio, I think, still remains to be seen, but from what I've seen so far, it definitely looks like it checks out. His opponent, Volkov, is a very tall, rangy fighter, uses his length very well for the division. His kicks, very solid kicking game. His arm reach is actually not that crazy. I think that Gane might actually have reach advantage, but Volkov uses his kicks really well to maintain range, though. He mixes up his kicking game very well. He's got a good low kick, a good body kick, front kick, head kick, you name it. His striking is solid as well, but I feel that it's really his kicks that really lay the foundation for his striking and is really what sets up the rest of his offense. And it's something that he's able to really go to against a lot of these lower level heavyweights. He's able to just work that teep and really hurt opponents. But against someone like Gane, he might struggle a little bit, who, since Gane does have a pretty solid footwork and should be the quicker guy, a bit more athletic in there as well. And really with Volkov, the only fighters we've really seen him struggle against are wrestlers and Derek Lewis. And that was a fight where he was actually piecing up Derek Lewis for 99% of the fight, but gets knocked out in the last 10 seconds. So overall, Volkov is a really solid striker in my opinion, probably one of the best strikers in the division. The only issue with him is he is a little bit slow and plotty, but the guy has a ton of UFC experience, a ton of MMA experience, and has just a very well-rounded striking game in general. But taking a look at this matchup, I do think that this is a pretty close fight. And I did actually place a 1.5 unit bet on Volkov like way back, maybe I think like a month or so ago, just because I felt that the line would stay pretty close. I thought that this would kind of hover at around a pick'em. But it seems like all the money has been coming in on Gane. I can kind of see why. The guy's been riding a bit of hype. The guy looks phenomenal at heavyweight so far, and I definitely do feel that Gane has the athletic and speed and strength advantage. But I do favor Volkov by quite a bit in terms of MMA experience. I mean, Volkov has over 40 MMA fights, and Gane only has 8. I mean, Volkov has as many losses as Cyril Gane has wins. So, yeah, Volkov definitely has the MMA experience, and I do feel that Volkov is at his peak right now. I mean, in terms of athleticism and in terms of, like, technical ability, right now I think it's all coming together for Volkov, and this is where it's really all starting to come together, and we're really seeing, like, prime Alexander Volkov, whereas with Cyril Gane, he is, I believe, in his physical prime, but I think he still has a ways to go in terms of reaching his full technical potential, even though he has looked really good so far. But going back to this matchup and how it will potentially play out, I think, again, this is going to be a really close fight, so I don't see how the line should be this wide. Honestly, I feel that whoever's the fighter that's setting the pace, whoever's the one that's pressuring, will likely be the one that's having a bit more success. I think that both fighters honestly do their best work when they're the ones moving forward and they're the ones pressuring opponents. They don't fight as well on their back foot, even though they definitely can. I think that they have the most success when they're the ones moving forward. And Volkov being the veteran here, I trust him to be able to do that a little bit more. But ultimately, I feel that this is going to be a medium-paced chess match because both guys are very technical. Neither guy has, phenomenal power or anything. So this will probably be a very back-and-forth kind of point-fighting matchup. And if that's the case, I do favor Volkov here because he does have the length advantage, and I do like his kicking game a little bit more. I think that at range, he will have a lot more success just working the kicks. And if Gane is able to crash the pocket, I think that he will have a bit of success there. But anytime the fight's at distance, I do favor Volkov a little bit more. And the crazy thing is, if you're looking at their most recent wins, I do think that Volkov slightly edges it out in terms of like strength of competition, but really not by much, just because I think that the heavyweight division is pretty shallow. And I mean, if you just kind of go through the records of Gane real quick, like Gane, his best win is, I definitely think, is Rosenstrike, but that was a fight where Rosenstrike really didn't make any sort of adjustments. And while on paper it was a good win in the sense that Rosenstrike's probably the highest ranked opponent for Gane, it was a fight where it was essentially a blowout. So I don't know if you could take too much from it aside from the fact that that he's got good technique and he's got a good game plan that he could stick to. But again, Rosenstrike never really made any adjustments. He never really made any changes that could really threaten Gane, and Gane kind of just coasted that fight. So while it was a good win, I don't think that you could take like too much from it. And then his win against JDS, very solid win, but at that point JDS's chin was just completely shot and was on like a 3-fight losing streak. Solid win against Boser. Just had a big power advantage there. I mean, that was a fight where both guys moved well. Both guys had good footwork, good technique, good volume, but Gane was just the way better athlete there and was landing the much heavier shots. Downtail Mays, a decent win as well, but, relatively low-level heavyweight. And then before that, just a bunch of cans. And if you look at Volkov's recent matches, Alistair Overeem, so, I had very solid win, but this was against a much declined Overeem where it was a very favorable matchup, honestly. Overeem was primarily just shelling up whenever Volkov started to unload on him, and eventually something did just get through. And, he just had a style that didn't really threaten Volkov at all. I think Volkov was able to see most of his power punches coming, and anytime Volkov started to unload, Overeem never really threatened with anything, and so Volkov was able to just start to unload on him. And before that, Walt Harris, another fight where it just didn't really age all that well just because Walt Harris has been on a very big skid. And that was a fight where, Volkov was sitting down a lot more on his shots, was able to really work the kicks, and eventually ended up getting Harris out of there with a kick to like the body. And, that's another narrative I wanted to address as well with Volkov. People saying that all of a sudden he's a knockout artist because he's put on a bit of weight, sitting down a bit more on his punches. And I do think there is a bit of truth to that, but you do also have to look at the matchups. Again, this is against Overeem, who pretty much just shelled up and let Volkov tee off on him, and against Walt Harris, who the guy's pretty one-dimensional and has been on quite a bit of a decline. But before that, he got matched up with Blades, who was able to pretty much just out-wrestle him. And I think the Greg Hardy fight is actually pretty telling, because that was a fight where Volkov kind of respected the power of Hardy, just looked to outpoint him the whole fight, didn't really blow him out. I mean, he pretty much coasted that fight, essentially. And so while I do think that Volkov has, he's definitely put on a bit of muscle and has started to sit down a bit more on his strikes, I don't think that this guy's, turned into a phenomenal finisher all of a sudden. And as far as this matchup goes, I don't think that he'll be finishing Ciryl Gane, just because I think that he will probably respect the power of Gane a little bit, and he probably won't look to overextend. So again, I do feel that this is going to be a pretty close, like back and forth sort of technical chess match sort of fight. So really, to wrap up this matchup, I do think that this is a 50-50 fight, honestly. And I did see a bit of value on Volkov, which is why I took a shot on him. And I definitely do think that there is value on him now at like plus 150. Really, I just favor the range and the experience of Volkov. And for Gane, I definitely favor the athleticism, his footwork. And I think he does have the power advantage as well. But I do think that this is a pretty close fight. And I do feel that this fight will likely go the distance, unless I'm completely wrong about my take on Volkov's power. Maybe, the guy is a knockout, threat now, so he could potentially get Gane out of there, but Gane hasn't really shown any durability issues. And outside of the Lewis fight, Volkov hasn't really shown any durability issues either, and I don't think that Gane has the finishing power of Lewis. So I do favor this fight to go over and potentially go the distance. But outside of that, I think this fight is pretty close, and it should be really fun. I'm really looking forward to this fight, and honestly, just really looking forward to see how the rest of the heavyweight division shakes out. But, in terms of a pick, I do have to go with Volkov here, and I do think that at like this plus money, I think he's the value side all day.